Hello and welcome to Surrey Network Distance Learning. I'm Tim Sheets, president of the Surrey Network, and I'm excited to present this first installment of educational informational topics in this internet format. This is a presentation on genetic selection and is given by Justin Fix, PhD geneticist. The Surrey Network is extremely fortunate to be partnering with Justin as our geneticist and consultant to the Surrey Herd Improvement Program, or SHIP. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to Justin, and he'll give his background and then jump into the presentation on genetic selection, what is it, and how it can improve my herd.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the presentation entitled Genetic Selection. What is it? How can it improve my herd? As many of you are aware, this presentation was given in early November. As a matter of full disclosure, this is not the original presentation. There was some technical difficulties with the recording of that, so I'm giving you a condensed version tonight. Some other background information. I will do my best to notify you when I'm switching slides, so you will have an idea of which slide I'm discussing, and hopefully that'll be able to allow everybody to keep up, as you will have the audio file and also then the presentation. They will not go hand in hand necessarily as the same file, so you have to keep up between them. With that said, again, my name is Justin Fix. I'm presenting tonight, and as I move to the second slide here, I want to give you just a little bit of background, to give you an idea of why I'm working with the Surrey Network, kind of where I grew up in terms of the livestock industry, and also my training. As you can see there, just a little bit, I was born in Iowa, raised on a small purebred commercial cattle operation. I was lucky enough to earn a livestock judging scholarship to Lakeland College. From there, I went on to Iowa State, where I majored in ag business, but I was on the livestock judging team, and at the time, my judging coach, a guy by the name of Dr. Clint Schwab, was working on his graduate work in animal breeding and genetics. Now, of course, as livestock judge, I'd heard of EPDs and indexes and that, but wasn't really familiar in terms of what a geneticist did. I knew I wanted to work with animals, and I knew I liked numbers, but I also didn't want to spend all my days in an office. And kind of seeing what he was doing, and it really sparked an interest. So from there, after I finished up and worked for his professor for a couple of summers, I was put in contact with Dr. Todd C. from North Carolina State University, where I got both my master's and PhD in swine breeding and genetics. So that's kind of where my graduate work is. It was genetics, but it was also applied production, kind of a combination of the two. Had a couple industry internships. From there, I went on to the National Swine Registry, where I got some more purebred experience and really kind of the association background that I'll talk about a little bit later. And this is where the contact came with the Surrey Network and working together through our former CEO, Daryl Anderson. And as you can see, I have a passion for livestock improvement, also the breed associations and how they work, and really putting the two together and providing a benefit to those using the service. However, a great opportunity came up early this summer. Well, to tell you the truth, it was late last year when the discussion started. I took the position early summer, and it was really just a chance to grow my influence within the industry, become part of a larger technical group. I still love purebreds and love to work with them. It's just from a professional standpoint, it really gave me an opportunity to expand that influence, as I mentioned. So that's just a little bit of background, kind of give you an idea why this guy by the name of Justin Fix is giving you a presentation, and hopefully give you some insight into where I'm coming from on all these. I'll do my best to explain it. I know there's all groups here, from little experience with genetics to a fair amount, so I'll try to describe it in a manner and give some analogies that hopefully make it understandable, but at the same time not too basic that those wanting to gain some information can as well. So the title, as you can see, was pretty generic. I'm going to move on to that next slide entitled Genetic Selection, What is it? Well, generally speaking, what we'll call animal breeders, that's geneticists, that's people breeding them, trying to make improvement, they strive to improve their herd with respect to a breed ideal or increased performance. Yes, we all have different species, but generally speaking, we're all trying to do the same thing and make our breed better, or our species better. Now, The real goal behind that, there is some altruistic aspects of wanting to make the animals better, but we also want to make some money, whether that's selling animals to the show ring, or for my particular case, we basically influence about 15 to 20% of the pork in the United States, and we got to make sure we're making money. We're making these animals more efficient, we're making them grow faster, whatever it may be. And as you see there in that next bullet, it kind of generally breaks some of these down. It can be as simple as conformation, reproduction, growth, all these different areas. While maybe some may be similar across species, each of their species has their own individuals too. But regardless of that, the basics of genetic selection is trying to make improvement in some trait, or hopefully several traits, within your respective species. Next slide. So as we look to, we kind of describe genetic selection, well, how do we improve these traits? It's just as simple as going out there in the pasture, in the pen, right, and just selecting the best animal. Well, we all know it's not quite that simple. Yes, it can get you there, but there's a lot more to it. And as a geneticist, one thing we always say, first we have to know what we want to improve. It's hard to make improvement if you don't know what you're focusing on. Well, what does that really mean? Okay, well, I can go out and say, I'm going to make that animal better. If I don't know what trait I'm looking at, whether that's growth or fleece characteristics or whatever it is, and have some sort of ideal for that trait, whether that's a subjective or objective measure, I can't make progress in it. It just makes it really challenging if you don't have somewhere to measure and to try and make improvement. So as we move to the next slide, this is a very busy one, and I'll admit, and I apologize, however you want to say it, that some of my slides reference swine, but it's not really the aspect of the traits that are in there. It's just to show you how complicated, whether it's species or breed, an ideal, or it's a profitability aspect within that. And what this is pigs weaned per sow per year. Very simple one on the top left there. And a lot of people look at that as their trait of interest and what they're trying to improve, or their end product, if you will. But one thing to point out is it's not just that simple. It's not a single trait. There's a lot of different things we can go for. If you want a reference into the alpaca, we'll look at a quality fleece. It's not just one thing, whether it's consistency or whether it's in terms of the micron size of the fleece or whatever it may be. There's a lot of different things that go into a quality fleece. So we need to make sure we understand that and we focus on the ones within that are the most important. Now, an example of that we look at these, and I kind of referenced it on that previous slide, but I'm moving to the next one here with some tables, and it has a title there that we really need to know what traits are economically important. So we have this one, and I have another slide, but basically that's however many different traits there, must be like 10, 12 of them. And there are a lot of different ones that were given from this SHIP program that we looked at before. And what I'm saying with this is all of these traits may or may not be important. I'm not here to judge. I'm not part of that. But we need to know which one of those are economically important. Now, you may say we're not getting paid for that, but in this case, economically important might be what's important in the show ring, or what is important when you're selling your fleece. However that may be, we need to make sure we understand that. Because if they're not economically important, then they kind of balance down as to where we look at them from a selection standpoint. And then this next one here is some more on the actual fleece characteristics from the lab. Again, we have a lot of different ones here, whatever that is, again, 8 to 10 of them probably. And as we look at these, they're all probably important in some frame or some form or another, but we're concerned with how important they are. We need to make sure we understand just how much each of those have in terms of their value, so as we look and focus on those to make selection. We'll be honest here, as we look at genetic selection, you may select for a trait, but if it doesn't have economic importance, whether that's increasing production, increasing your ability to sell them, so how much other people desire to have them, whatever it may be, if you're not looking to do that, then it's probably more of a hobby, and you're not trying to make profit in there, because you're not selecting with something in mind of making it better. So that's why we want to make sure we're understanding each of these traits as we try to input them into our selection program. So those are some examples. I'm going to move into this next slide here. Now don't worry, I just want to put this up because as a geneticist, if I don't have at least one formula involved, they might kick me out of the society. It took a long time to become a part of it, so we got to make sure we keep everybody happy. And then if somebody were to happen to stumble upon this, they don't think I'm a fake geneticist. But in all seriousness, I want to put this up here because I want to give you a little bit more insight into what genetics are. So I've talked about the traits. Well, each of those traits may or may not be important, but how we make progress in them. So we find some that are important. Now we need to see if we can make genetic progress. As you'll see, there are very basic equation is phenotype equals genetics plus environment. Now, environment is basically anything. It may be the weather, it may be the farm, it may be lots of different things. It's how you manage them, age, basically anything that cannot be passed down from parent to offspring. So what we're looking at is we have this genetics term there, and that's what we can select for, and will be able to be passed on from sire to offspring or dam to offspring. The environment, on the other hand, is something that's causing the phenotype that we actually evaluate. So in this case, I'm going to use growth. If I go out and weigh an animal and it weighs 500 pounds, the phenotype is 500 pounds. Now, a part of that is the genetics that came from its parents, and a part of that is environment. And that's all that equation is basically saying. Next up, we have right below that is h squared, or little h squared, which is called heritability. Heritability, in a very simple definition, is the percent of variation that is accounted for by genetic influence that can be passed on. For example, if I have a trait and I go out and measure 100 animals, and I measure them for growth in terms of their weight again, and they may range from 400 pounds to 1,000 pounds, there's a variation that occurs there, and that's the phenotypic variation. Now, a portion of that is accounted for or caused by genetics. And that's what we're looking for within a trait to give us an idea how we can make genetic progress in them. How or even if we can make genetic progress in them. So as we move to the next slide, this is again an example, and I apologize, but I wanted to give you a pretty broad distribution of different traits for heritability numbers. And this is swine, but I want you to show what we call back fat. It's a measure on the animal, just like you would think. It's what we call a composition trait, back fat, muscling, those type. Those are pretty highly heritable, 0.4 to 0.5 or maybe even 0.6. A highly heritable trait is not one. You don't see very many like that within livestock. You will find some in research environments. So we have that, and that means 40% of the variation, if I go out and measure a bunch of animals, is due to genetics. That allows me to make quite a bit of progress in that trait if I were to select to improve back fat. But some of the other ones I want to show you below are reproductive traits. Number weaned, number born alive. They're pretty self-explanatory. A pig has litters. Number born alive is how many pigs were alive when she had them. There's a lot of things environmentally that can go into that aren't influenced by genetics. So, the number born alive heritability is 0.1. Fairly low. Now, we can still make progress in it, and we do. That's a big part of our selection programs throughout the swine industry. However, it's just a little more difficult to make progress in that than it is in like back fat or feed efficiency or some of those other traits. One sidebar, a kind of a chicken or egg thing here. Which one do we want to come to first? But as I move to this next slide, I want to give you some definitions that are kind of important that I've bounced around. Maybe I should have done first. I don't know, but I at least want to give them to you. Now, a lot of it's for your reference to have here. And again, they're very simplified traits. These aren't definitions, not necessarily what you'd go find out of a genetics book, but something to try to describe to everybody that's listening in a simple manner. Again, phenotype, visual appearance, what we're actually measuring. Genotype, the genetic combination causing the animal to express their phenotype. The heritability, h squared, it's the proportion of total phenotypic variance made up by the additive genetic variance. Additive genetic variance is basically kind of a sophisticated way of saying the proportion of genetics that is passed on from parent to offspring. Again, that's measured from 0 to 1. I'll also talk a little bit about genetic correlation. That's a genetic relationship between two traits. It ranges from -1 to 1. You can have a very highly correlated trait that's either -1 or 1, meaning one thing might be height and waist size in people. If I select height, I might have bigger waist size. So as I'm increasing height, my waist size will also be increasing. Now that's a very high one. One thing that we have a negative correlation in swine is growth and, well, let me actually switch that around. But growth and back fat. So as we select animals to grow faster, well, actually the way we measure it is days to 250 pounds or something along those lines. So we want them to have fewer days. Well, as we reduce those days and make the animals leaner, we may in fact change back fat. And so it may be a negative correlation that they're still going and moving together, they're just moving in opposite directions. So it's a very complicated and kind of rambling on way of saying that traits can either move together and be genetic correlated, or they can move opposite. So one might go up, one might go down, but either way, there's a genetic correlation there that's causing traits. If you select for one, you're causing the other one to change as well. Also, these little bounce throughs, we have two different terms: EBV, estimated breeding value, and EPD, estimated progeny difference. They're basically the same. However, the EPD is 1/2 of the EBV. It's strictly a scalar effect, but if I go and take an animal, the estimated breeding value, if I have that for an animal, it's the value of an animal as a parent. Now, for some trait, we might have an EBV of 2. Well, the EPD then would be half of that, or 1. The reason we do that is because only half the genes that an offspring gets are from one parent, the other half are from the other. So the EPD is then the amount that we would expect to be passed on to an offspring. If we have two animals, one has an EPD of 2 and one has an EPD of 1, we would expect on average the first animal's offspring to be 1 pound heavier, that one EPD heavier, one EPD value heavier, if you will, whatever that trait might be, than you would see for the other one. So I want to give you another bit of an example here, and it's kind of a basic example of an EPD. Depending on how you downloaded this may actually work together, and it may show some animation as you work through it. But I really just want to show you again the swine one. I apologize, but a swine example here. That as we look through, it's got 2 sires, and it's looking at them, and I just want to show you how an EPD is calculated. We have 2 animals. They weighed on the same day, but one was 170 days old, and the other was 160 days. The one animal weighed 270 pounds, the other one weighed 250. Well, you look at those, you take that information and go, well, I'm not really sure which one's better. The one weighed more, but he's a little bit older. I don't know. Well, we can adjust those to a constant age, and in fact, if you look at that, they both would have reached 250 pounds at the same age because we adjusted it down. Now, here's where the part of the EPD comes in. We look at the performance environments. One was in very poor health, old facilities, it was hot out. The other one was brand new facility. It wasn't as hot. It was high health. And if you look at the contemporary group of the other animals that were measured that day, for boar A, or the first animal on the left, it was 170. So that animal, even though it was the same, he was 10 days faster, or it took him 10 less days to reach that weight than it did for the others. So he was quite a bit better. On the other one, his group averaged 158. He was actually slower than the average. So as we take that information into our genetic evaluation, then we also take some pedigree information, we're able to look and see that, well, the animal on the left is actually better. And that's kind of a simple example to show you that raw data, without knowing relative information, contemporary group information, you can't necessarily know what's best until you adjust for that. So move to the next slide. And we'll look into just a little bit on EPD discussion. And again, kind of make sure I'm kind of being a geneticist here. A brief EPD discussion we utilize a statistical method called Best Linear Unbiased Predictor, or BLUP. And it estimates the EBVs for animals using a lot of different things, but the actual information, so what we go measure, pedigree, anything that might, in terms of its relatives, cousins, great-grandma, aunts, brothers, whatever it might be, parents, within there to see how their performance, because we would expect, just like you would go see any family, you would expect it to be similar. It may not be exactly, but they have similar genes, so depending on the trait, you should expect some similarities. We also take into multiple traits. We might have a couple traits that we measure that help predict the other trait because of the genetic correlation. And then the last part there is it takes into account effects such as season, farm, gender, age, as classifier in case of some of the scores with the Surrey program we're doing, but a lot of different things that can go in there that it can account for and help give a better prediction of its genetic merit. So, we measure the traits and we get EPDs. Well, it's not exactly that, because I'm moving to the next slide. It's not exactly that simple, but some items that we need to keep in mind. We must have accurate data. I say this and I've said it and I've had it interpreted in many different countries when I've given presentations. No data is better than inaccurate data. You can submit all the inaccurate data you want, but you're going to get inaccurate results. So it doesn't do you any good. And eventually the program will come and it'll show it. Depending on how it's set up and depending on data, you'll find out, and everybody will find out pretty quickly your data is not right. So it's kind of pointless to submit inaccurate data. We also must collect data on all animals. Just measuring good animals or only a select few greatly biases the results. For your good animals to look good, you got to have bad animals in there. And kind of here on a genetic evaluation standpoint, there's always going to be bad animals. So you got to make sure we get them all measured. We also must collect the data consistently and repeatedly. And by that I mean if we're, let's say from this classifier, we need to make sure we're measuring and scoring those traits consistently over time, but also repeatedly. We don't want to measure one group of animals this month and then not measure another one for 2 years. If we need to measure them every spring, we need to measure them every spring, and we need to do it repeatedly and consistently. And we also need to get a large contemporary group. We don't want to go out there and measure 2 animals. It's hard to say what exactly a great contemporary group is. It depends on how related the animals are, the traits, and some other things. But if you get much less than 10 or 15, you're getting pretty darn low, and I'd sure like to have it closer to 20 or 30. Again, it depends on the exact trait, but we want to make sure the contemporary groups, and in this case, for many of you, a contemporary group for scoring would be when this classifier would come out and classify all your animals that day at the farm. That would be a contemporary group, and we want to make sure that's as big as possible. So, again, moving to the next slide, kind of tying this all together, and I want to flow into the value of a breed registry-based evaluation. Well, first of all, this presentation is one of the values of it is I'm pretty certain that each of you wouldn't be able to, one, you wouldn't have the contact to be able to get a geneticist to come speak, but you also wouldn't have the resources to get that done. For instance, a lot of you probably seen the budgets, but to get a genetic evaluation completed is not cheap. So you need to get the technical expertise that everybody can leverage their contributions, and then they all get value from it. That also then is software and hardware, whether that's the genetic software, it's pretty expensive, the servers of the central processing, whatever it might be, classifiers that go out, all that allows and is a value that's provided by being part of a breed registry-based evaluation. The next one then is a genetic value. If we only have 50 animals, we're not going to get a very good evaluation. But if I have 50 animals and there's another 100, and the next thing you know we have 5,000 animals, that's a pretty good evaluation. We can increase that, and that's on the smaller side, but whatever that might be is you combine together, you get more data submitted, and most often the herds are somewhat related. Now, some herds are more related than others, but there's a lot of ties that are created, and then as a result, everybody's able to benefit from that. And then the last thing is the collaboration, increased data collection methods, and volume of data. I kind of hinted on that in the first one, but it's everybody's able to work together to build that database, and you'll hear it a lot if you talk about geneticists, is the database there and the data included. We all like to have as much as possible, much good data as possible, and as we work together as a group, we're able to add to that more quickly. So a little more background when we move into some ship data here in the next slide. We'll look at this and kind of give you some information. I think you guys have, at least some of you, if you've seen it, the report is available, and it gives you an idea of some of the evaluations that I'm getting to from a genetic standpoint. I'm using these as an aspect to describe genetics, more so than anything else, but I want to give you an idea where the data came from and exactly what they are. I'll move to the next slide quickly. So this is ship data for classification traits, and what we have is a couple different traits here, and I kind of get into it, not too much, but basically the first one, those 4 traits are all classified or scored traits for fleece, and one is an phenotypic confirmation one. The first four were evaluated together because they were genetically correlated, and you'll notice on the X or the diagonal is the bold. Those are the heritabilities. And for the four fleece traits, they're from 0.22 to 0.29. That's a pretty moderate correlation. Give you an idea, growth in swine is about that heritable, and we've made a ton of progress in it. So progress can be made with those heritabilities. You'll also look down on the genetic correlations, and a lot of these are pretty similar traits when classified. That's to say that for these particular four, if I select for one, I'm probably going to make improvement, or I will make improvement in the others, because the traits as scored in this manner are fairly similar. Now we look down there, the legs of confirmation. I didn't run it with the other ones, so it's not part of the model. Therefore, it will not have genetic correlations, but that is kind of in line with some confirmation traits. Because in this case it's legs, it's not a single joint. I believe it's multiple joints. If you get in and measure single joints, like for us we might do pasterns or hock, we can get pretty good heritabilities on those. As we start doing a full leg, where it might have a pastern, a hock, and a hip involved, that's three different joints that may not be influenced the same, and we tend to see those heritabilities be a bit lower when we're not looking at the individual joints. A little more background on, as I move to the next slide, on the SHIP EPDs that have been estimated. And what I've done here is I've provided all 5 traits, and now I've looked at the EPDs, the expected progeny differences, and I've given you means, mins, and max. And if you look at all those traits, the means first, they're all about 0, just a little bit off. But the thing I want to look at is the min and the max. They're basically a full point difference in the min and the max. So in terms of a genetic value, from the worst, let's say they're both males, the worst sire to the best sire, they're different ones, but there's a full point difference. So if we would score their animals, we would expect the offspring of the one with the max to always be, or on average, not always, on average, be a full point higher in whatever trait you're measuring of those 4. Quite a bit of variation there. A lot of differences, and in my opinion, some opportunity to make some changes or improvement within the population. Now the next one there, I didn't talk about it much, but it's accuracy. Accuracy again is from 0 to 1. And an offspring or an animal that's been scored itself has a lot of offspring, maybe it's parents, maybe it's siblings, can be pretty accurate. In this case, we have some that are as high as 0.78. Excuse me. That's quite accurate. So that would mean if you go out and have a heritability, or you go out and have an EPD for that animal, you would expect fairly confidently that those EPDs would be passed on consistently because there's a lot of information there behind it. Now you have some that are down low as 0. Obviously you have within our pedigree some great-great-great-grandparents or whatever it might be that do not have very close relatives that have any information. Therefore the accuracy is pretty low on those. And a mean of 0.25, that's an okay. I mean, because there's so many animals that don't have scores, you're going to be about that area. Moving to the next slide, well, it'll show just percentiles, 99th, 95th, 90th. That's just to give an idea. If you were to look at an animal and say, all right, he's got an EPD of for luster of 0.25, well, that animal's in the top 5%. It's up there, and you can look at them across there. It's again more for reference if you were to look at anything, but it gives you an idea of basically where the average is. And then the animals, if we were to look at a single EPD, get a pretty good idea of where they rank within the population of those that have been scored. So you move to the next one. I've kind of hinted at this a couple times, and I don't really want to mess with it too much. And the labels are actually just a little bit wrong here. I don't know if your version's been corrected on the website, but basically it's supposed to have the 2 different sires, sire A and sire B, and then instead of luster and sire B, it's supposed to be sire A, sire B, and then the 2 different traits for them, and it goes through and tells you how you would interpret the differences between sire A and sire B for each of the traits, and go through and just give you an idea. I'm not going to go through it too much because I've described it a little bit, but more just a hard example for everybody to look at. We'll try to get the updated version emailed out, but I just want to make sure in case some have looked at the old one to give you an idea of what that is. So as we move to the next one, and this one I'm not going to talk about much, just kind of hit on. And this is what we focus on within the swine industry and also a lot in the cattle industry, and it's what we call a bioeconomic selection index. So we go through and we say, okay, these are the traits that are important, whatever they might be. There might be 7 of them, or there might be 2 of them. I think everybody realizes there's not a single trait that drives profit, drives quality, drives whatever it is within a species. What a selection index does is it allows us to select for multiple traits and make progress in all of them. In this case, I gave one there's increasing fleece uniformity, increasing conformation scores, and increasing luster. What I could do, or we could do, is go say, okay, increasing fleece uniformity, one score is equal to $5. Increasing conformation is worth $6, and increasing luster is maybe worth $2. And we're able to go put those on the traits, weight each trait accordingly, and then I'll get an idea of each animal as they value for all traits. And that is truly the end goal of what we would take this data for and provide to breeders. Now, there's some time to develop all of this, but if I were to envision where we'd want to be in a few years, this is what I would picture of those that are truly interested in making selection improvements within their population. We'd be able to determine the most economically important traits. I say we, a group, would be able to determine that, and then we'd be able to say, okay, we need to combine these. This is what they're worth. Here's the index, and then you make progress selection emphasis on that, and you're able to make progress in multiple traits. Next slide. Again, a simple example for swine, but I want to show you how that works. 3 traits there, and basically it says, all right, a number born alive, an extra pig's worth 15. Weaned estrus is basically from when I wean them to when those pigs come back into heat, or that sow or that female. It's every day it takes longer after feeder, so it takes more money. Litter weaning weight, how heavy is that litter at weaning? The more it weighs, the more value I have. I take the EPD for each of those traits, and then I multiply that times its value, and then I get a total index value. And this shows an example of it, but it gives me an idea of based on these 3 traits that may have 3 different values, instead of going through and trying to calculate them or guess, it says, based on the numbers we've put into the system, this is what animal's worth more, and as I look at all the traits. Next slide. So again, the index was just kind of to give everybody a brief introduction of what we can do into the future as working together. So, how do we improve our herd? Or how can genetics improve my herd? Well, once a comprehensive genetic valuation is in place, can use the EPDs or indexes, hopefully eventually, to create a ranking of animals and identify the superior ones. We want to make sure we perpetuate their genes, spread them through our system, and make sure we're making progress within our herd. Unfortunately, SHIP's not there yet, so what do we do now? Well, as a group, with the breeders and also the board and the SHIP program, and also then myself, we work together to make sure we're getting more data. And as I slide into the next one, I kind of describe this some more. And we're contributing and building to that database. But in the meantime, we can work to incorporate EPDs into selection decision. That's not to say you go out and say, okay, here's a list of 10 EPDs. I'm going to make all my selection on this. No, that's more to say, okay, we incorporate that. We'll make sure maybe I have a couple weaknesses within my herd for various traits. Well, I can go choose a sire or buy one or whatever it might be to inject that and say, I didn't want to improve the luster of my herd or the luster of the fleeces within my herd. So then we can make sure we go through and select animals to do that, because we know genetically where they might be and the contribution they might be able to make. Again, it's kind of a combination and a working in process, building the database together, and as that builds, the data will become more valuable, and we'll continually work together to be able to use that in a more efficient manner within each individual herd. Next slide, summary. I know I've moved through this pretty quick, but I wanted to kind of get a condensed version for everybody to be able to listen to. We need to first make sure we're able to determine the economically important traits. Then we can determine if those traits have a heritable genetic component. Can we make progress in them? They may be economically important, but maybe it's more of a management decision that impacts them rather than genetics. We need to make sure we can, this is a big one I should highlight, but make sure we continue to accurately collect data on all animals, build that database, get a better evaluation, and continue to improve it. Utilize breed registry genetic program to calculate the genetic information, and we can work together, as I said, to continue to develop a more comprehensive SHIP program. And finally, use the EPDs and indexes eventually, currently MPDs, but also indexes, within your herd to make an improvement. I'm a guy who comes from an evaluation background, and I'm not just necessarily a numbers guy, but I'm also, you can tell where my job is now, and also that my background, I'm a true believer in the combination of it. There's definitely an art and a science to genetic improvement. I think a lot of people are able to, you have the evaluation clinics and things like that, and you also know about them yourself for the phenotype part. But things such as this and also the SHIP program can contribute to continue to build the genetic component and the science component of it that eventually everybody can use in conjunction to continue to make progress. So again, apologize if some things weren't understandable or rambled on at times, but hopefully was able to get an overview that gave everybody a little bit of a benefit who was able to listen to this. And if there's any questions, I believe there's some contact information to me or some follow-up. But again, thank you for checking in and watching this. Thank you very much.